Pedro López, one of the world's most prolific serial killers. Imagine a monster, a shadow that moved through the heart of South America, leaving a trail of devastation so vast it's almost impossible to comprehend. This isn't a character from a horror movie. This is the story of a real person, a man who might be walking free today. His name is Pedro Alonso López, and he's been called one of the most prolific serial killers in recorded history. The numbers are staggering, linking him to the murders of over 300 young girls across his native Colombia and neighboring Ecuador and Peru. But what's even more chilling is the uncertainty. After a relatively short prison sentence, he vanished. The monster of the Andes might still be out there. Today we're going to delve into the dark story of Pedro López, not to glorify him, but to understand the circumstances that created such a predator, to honor the memories of his victims, and to grapple with the terrifying question, where is he now? To understand the monster, we must first look at the boy. Born in Colombia in 1948, López's childhood was anything but stable. It was a life marred by poverty and violence from the very beginning. Reports indicate that at the young age of 8, he was cast out of his own home by his mother after she discovered him acting inappropriately with his younger sister. Alone on the streets of Bogotá, he was thrust into a brutal world where survival was a daily battle. He quickly fell in with a group of older street children, where he was subjected to further abuse and was initiated into a life of petty crime. This wasn't a childhood, it was a training ground for a predator. He learned to be invisible, to exploit trust, and to harbor a deep-seated rage against the world that had abandoned him. By his teenage years, he was already entrenched in a criminal lifestyle, stealing cars and drifting from place to place. This period on the fringes of society hardened him, stripping away his empathy and replacing it with a cold, calculating desire for power and control. It was during these formative years that the seeds of the monster of the Andes were sown, watered by neglect and fertilized by cruelty. In 1969, López's criminal activities finally caught up with him. He was arrested for car theft and sentenced to 7 years in a notoriously harsh prison. But prison, instead of being a place of rehabilitation, became his finishing school in violence. He claimed that while incarcerated, he was brutally assaulted by 4 other inmates. In a chilling act of retaliation, he hunted them down one by one within the prison walls and killed them. The other prisoners, aware of the circumstances, allegedly covered for him, and he was never charged for these murders. He served only 2 years of his sentence before being released in 1971. This experience seemed to cement his path. He emerged from prison not chastened, but emboldened, with a twisted sense of justice and a thirst for revenge that he would soon unleash upon the most vulnerable. He saw the world as a place that had only ever hurt him, and now he was determined to be the one who inflicted the pain. His targets would be young, innocent girls, whom he saw as symbols of the purity and trust he had lost and come to despise. After his release, López began a horrifying journey that would span 3 countries. He left Colombia and drifted into Peru, where his reign of terror began in earnest around 1978. His method was deceptively simple and utterly monstrous. He would wander through local markets and poor villages preying on the innocence of children. He specifically targeted young indigenous girls, often between the ages of 8 and 12. He would gain their trust with small gifts or promises of treats, luring them away from crowded areas to secluded spots. It was there that he would commit his unspeakable acts. He later confessed that he murdered approximately 100 girls in Peru alone. His spree went unnoticed for a time, a testament to the vulnerability of these marginalized communities, whose missing children often failed to attract widespread attention from authorities. He became a ghost, moving from town to town, leaving a trail of heartbreak and unanswered questions. His ability to blend in, to appear non-threatening, was his greatest weapon. He was a predator, hiding in plain sight, exploiting the very fabric of communities that were already struggling. The first time the law came close to stopping him was a near miss that highlights the tragic failures of the justice system. In Peru, López was captured by members of a local Ayacucho tribe after they found him attempting to abduct a 9-year-old girl. The tribal community, having suffered the loss of their own children, took matters into their own hands. They were preparing to execute him according to their own laws when a passing American missionary intervened. The missionary persuaded the tribe to turn López over to the official police. However, the Peruvian authorities, for reasons that remain frustratingly unclear, simply deported him. They didn't investigate his potential connection to the dozens of missing children in their country. They just kicked him out, pushing the problem across the border into Ecuador. This single act of bureaucratic failure allowed the monster of the Andes to continue his horrific spree. He walked free, crossing the border with no record of his crimes, ready to begin his hunt anew in a country that had no idea who had just entered its borders. Once in Ecuador, López's murderous campaign escalated dramatically. Between 1979 and 1980, he unleashed a wave of terror that overwhelmed the nation. He continued his established pattern, targeting young girls in local markets and on city outskirts. He confessed to killing 3 to 4 girls every single week. The sheer volume of missing children became impossible to ignore. Panic swept through communities in Ambato, Quito, and other cities. Parents were terrified to let their children out of their sight. The police were baffled, chasing a phantom killer who left little evidence behind. He was meticulous, choosing his victims and locations with a chilling precision that made him incredibly difficult to track. The national psyche of Ecuador was scarred as newspaper headlines screamed about the disappearances. He later stated that he preferred Ecuadorian girls, a horrifying comment that underscores the detached and predatory nature of his thinking. For months, he operated with impunity, his confidence growing with each victim, leaving a trail of grief that would eventually lead to his downfall. The break in the case came in April 1980. A flash flood in Ambato, Ecuador, unearthed a gruesome makeshift graveyard. The rushing waters uncovered the bodies of 4 young girls, all victims of the killer who had been haunting the region. This horrifying discovery confirmed the police's worst fears and finally gave them a tangible lead. The investigation intensified, and the evidence led them to a local market vendor who remembered a man she didn't trust, a man who had tried to lure away her own daughter. That man was Pedro López. The police set up a sting operation, and when López returned to the market and attempted to abduct another young girl, they were there to arrest him. The reign of the monster of the Andes had seemingly come to an end. When the police searched his belongings, they found the watch of one of his recent victims, a crucial piece of evidence linking him directly to the murders. Confronted with this, López's calm demeanor finally cracked. In custody, Pedro López did something astonishing, he confessed, and not just to 1 or 2 murders, but to a staggering number. He calmly led investigators to the graves of 53 of his victims in Ecuador, but he claimed that was only a fraction of his total. He detailed his crimes across 3 countries, claiming 110 murders in Ecuador, 100 in Peru, and more than 100 in his home country of Colombia. The grand total? Over 300 victims. Police were initially skeptical, believing it to be the boast of a deranged man. However, after he led them to multiple burial sites and provided details only the killer could know, they began to believe the horrifying truth. An Ecuadorian newspaper dubbed him the Monster of the Andes, a name that would forever be associated with his terrifying legacy. In 1980, López was convicted of the murders of the 53 girls whose bodies were found in Ecuador and sentenced to 16 years in prison, the maximum sentence allowed by Ecuadorian law at the time. The world thought a monster had finally been caged for good, but the story doesn't end there. In 1994, after serving just 14 years, Pedro López was released from prison in Ecuador for good behavior. Instead of being set free, he was extradited back to his native Colombia to face charges there. However, he was placed in a psychiatric hospital in Bogotá. The authorities deemed him insane, a diagnosis that kept him confined. Yet, this confinement was also temporary. In 1998, after being declared sane by hospital psychiatrists, Pedro López was released on a bail of about $50. He was a free man, a man who had confessed to over 300 murders, who had served less than 2 decades, was released back into the world. The conditions of his release were minimal. He was simply supposed to report to authorities periodically. And then, he vanished. Since 1998, Pedro López's whereabouts have been a complete mystery. There have been reported sightings and even a suspected murder in 2002 that bore his signature. But nothing has ever been confirmed. He disappeared without a trace. So where is the monster of the Andes today? That is the terrifying, unanswered question. Is he dead? It's possible. He would be in his 70s now. But it's just as possible that he is alive, living under a new name, a ghost in the crowd. Interpol still has an active warrant for his arrest for a murder committed back in 1996. But the trail has been cold for over 2 decades. The thought that one of history's most prolific serial killers could be living anonymously somewhere in the world is profoundly disturbing. His story is a chilling reminder of the failures of justice systems, the vulnerability of marginalized communities, and the dark capabilities of a human being stripped of empathy. It's a story without an ending, a shadow that still lingers over the Andes. The memory of his hundreds of victims, whose names are largely lost to history, demands that we don't forget. We have to remember this story, not for the monster, but for them, and for the chilling reality that some monsters never get locked away for good. What you see in this photo is the real image of Pedro López. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey. It's important to confront these stories to understand the world we live in. If you found this video informative, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into complex cases. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one.